So thank you all for joining. It is right at noon and we're going to keep on a good schedule today. So you are in the over-the-counter animal antibiotic webinar with Reagan Adams, who is our state veterinarian specialist through Colorado State University Extension. My name is Beth Dallaire. I'm the Pueblo County Ag and Natural Resource Coordinator through Extension here in Pueblo. With that, Reagan's going to go ahead and walk us through her presentation. If you have questions, please stay muted until the end of it. There will be time for a Q&A session. If you have thoughts as she's going along, you're welcome to type them in the chat, but please do stay muted while she goes through it. So with that, Reagan, I'll hand it off to you and we'll get rolling.
Great. Good afternoon, I guess we are today. Thank you so much for attending this. Please encourage your friends and family who are concerned about this issue to watch it. So as Beth said, I'm the state veterinary specialist for CSU Extension. On this screen is my email as well as my telephone number. If we weren't able to answer any questions or if you have any concerns, please contact me. I'd be happy to talk to any of you as much as you want to, because this comes as a shock to many people when it really is part of a long planned issue. So the structure of the webinar, although I am down in the corner of this slide set, at least on my view, which is sort of new for me, is going to be pretty bland and very word heavy on the screens. The reason is that many people will be watching this afterwards, and I want to make sure that they get the same, that everybody gets the same message. So this isn't going to be full of fancy slides. It's just going to be the facts, baby. We're going to talk about the facts. So as we say here, the issue is animal over-the-counter antibiotics. What I'm going to try to do is go over really the what, when, who, why, and what to do. So we're really going through 5 topics of information that I'm going to go over with you, but I invite you and encourage you to ask more, deeper questions about this so that you understand it. The most important thing is to remember that it's medically important animal antibiotics that we're talking about. Those are ones that are used in people and animals. And they won't be available over the counter as you're used to walking into your feed store and potentially grabbing them off the shelves. We're going to talk about the what, when, who, why, and what to do. As I said before, the antibiotics, it's not all antibiotics, but it's the certain ones that are used on both people and animals, and they will no longer be available over the counter. This will be effective June 11th, 2023. The government group that is in charge of this area is the Center of Veterinary Medicine, Food and Drug Administration. They are the ones that started this rolling. Why is to decrease the development of antibiotic resistance in a bacteria. And we're going to get into each one of these topics more deeply in the next couple of minutes. What to do? There is a solution to the problem. The antibiotics will be available, but have to be available through a prescription from a veterinarian who's familiar with your animal operation. So to go into a little bit more depth, what's happening? The target really is medically important antimicrobial drugs. Antimicrobial means anything that's against fungus, bacteria, or viruses, but the term they often use is medically important antimicrobial drugs, and that includes antibiotics. Many of these animal antibiotics are available over the counter, but as of June 11th of this year, the antibiotics approved for animals will need to be available only by prescription through a veterinarian who is familiar with your animal operation. And these products will be labeled, "Caution, federal law restricts this drug to be used by or on the order of a licensed veterinarian." So that's what's important. To get these products, you have to get a prescription from a licensed veterinarian, and that has to be a veterinarian who is familiar with your animal operation. We call that a VCPR. You have a valid veterinary client-patient relationship with that veterinarian. It does not mean the veterinarian has to has to look at or have examined each of the animals that for whom they write a prescription, but they have to know how your operation is run so that they know you're on the right track to get a certain kind of antibiotic for a certain kind of condition. When's this happening? June 11th, that's the day. Everybody acts like it's a surprise, but 2023, June 11th has been the target date for years now. As I said before, and it's just this straightforward, the animal antibiotics that were purchased without restriction or over the counter from your feed stores, your farm supplies, etc., may no longer be available on those store shelves. The veterinary client-patient relationship is the important thing for producers and all animal owners to develop before this goes into effect, so that they can call up their veterinarian, explain the situation, and get a prescription for that drug. That you don't have to buy it from that veterinarian. You just have to get the prescription from the person that knows how your animal organization works. Those without the VCPR, as the acronym is said often, will have trouble getting these products immediately, because if they call a veterinarian who is not familiar with their operation, they won't be able to write a prescription. Who's doing this? So the Food and Drug Administration is part of the federal government and is responsible for protecting public health by regulating both human drugs and animal drugs. And they are able to regulate these drugs once they are put onto the market, while they're on the market, because FDA monitors the safety and effectiveness of the drugs, the manufacturing processes, and how the drug is marketed. It's has been part of their responsibility for years. This is not something new. Is this a surprise? It's not a surprise, or it shouldn't be a surprise for any animal producers, especially food animal producers or livestock producers. In 2017, the FDA mandated the veterinary feed directive, where it became illegal to use medically important antimicrobials in feed and water for animal production purposes. That meant growth promotion and feed efficiency without a VCPR with a veterinarian. So we have been through, in the livestock industry, we have been through this before. The result of that proclamation, the veterinary feed or regulation, the veterinary feed directive, meant that 93 products used in water and 115 products used in feed were converted from over-the-counter to prescription only. This got a lot of antibiotic use out of the general public's hands and more into the use when a veterinarian sees that it's the correct use of these antibiotics. In 2018, and that was 5 years ago, the FDA, Center for Veterinary Medicine, started a 5-year study, which has gotten us to where we are. And at the end of this presentation, there's a reference to that if anybody's interested. And in that, in this long study that they started, it explains the studies and the analysis that was done to support the removal of many of these important drugs from over-the-counter availability. Why is this happening? This is not something to make life harder on livestock owners or animal owners. It's not meant to make things more expensive. It is meant to slow the bacteria to which we're treating from becoming resistant to the antibiotics that we have. It's a nice reminder and somewhat surprising to me. I did not realize when penicillin was first put on the market, it only took 10 years for bacteria to begin to develop a resistance to it. So this can happen quickly, especially if the antibiotics are not used frugally. The bacteria, as I want to emphasize, develop resistance to the antibiotics if the bacteria are exposed often and inappropriately with, say, too small a dose, an inappropriate dose, or not given for a long enough time. So it is how we use these antibiotics that make them stay more effective. Also, compounding this problem of the resistance problem is the fact that in the last 20 years, the number of pharmaceutical companies interested in drug development has dropped from 18 to 4. So there are fewer new drugs being developed, and we need to make sure that the ones we have stay effective. Or as I say on the final blip, as a society, we must reconsider how to use antibiotics in people and animals to preserve this resource. Because if the pharmaceutical companies don't want to make them, because they don't think our needs are important, we won't have anything to turn to. What do you need to do? What you need to do as an animal owner, because this applies to people with both pets as well as livestock, as well as horses, is establish a veterinary client-patient relationship with a veterinarian. That means that the veterinarian should be familiar with how you run your animal operation, whether it's dogs and cats, and you have 1 or 2 to 1,000 cows on 1,000,000 acres. It doesn't matter the size of your operation, but the veterinarian should understand how you operate it, how the animals are managed and handled, the risks to which they are exposed, the kind of bacteria that they might be exposed to, and the goals of your operation. This VCPR should be established before you need the drugs. A busy veterinarian will have a hard time prioritizing someone that is not their client when they need those drugs. So you need to do that now. Don't panic. Prepare for this by getting a VCPR. The definition, a little bit about VCPRs, the definition of a valid VCPR varies from state to state. You can see here in the second paragraph what the definition of the Colorado VCPR is. And it just shows that there is a relationship between the veterinarian and the animal owner. Prescription drugs, veterinarians may only prescribe prescription medication when they have a VCPR with a patient. And so they do not have to, can't sell or distribute prescription medicines without that VCPR. You also might consider, some people will say, I don't need to have a VCPR. I'll just get some of those the drugs I think I need from my neighbor. Well, once this goes into effect, it will be against the law for your neighbor to give those drugs to you. So don't put that kind of pressure on your neighbors or your friends. I have here a series of references, and I apologize for this. It doesn't, you have to copy and paste these links on your computer to get to these brochures and fact sheets, but there are a whole group of fact sheets made by the FDA, including this very wordy 5-year plan for why they are making this this ruling about over-the-counter antibiotic removal. If you have questions, talk to me, but this is the word from the government that you would that I think you will understand more clearly why they're doing what they're doing. And finally, this goes on. I'd like to encourage people that are raising these kinds of livestock, beef and dairy, poultry, sheep and goats, to go to these particular links shown here, because they will go into more detail about what drugs are available for what species. In final, this is the kind of thing you'll get from that second page of references. When they talk about the implications for cattle, they explain the conditions of concern, the diseases where this would be affected, the pathogens or bacteria that they're trying to protect from developing resistance to antibiotics, and finally the affected medications that you will no longer see over the counter. So if you go back to those lists, you can get more details if that's of interest to you. So on that note, think I pulled that off in less than 15 minutes. I would like to open the door to any questions that you have.
You all are welcome to unmute or type into the chat with your questions. If you do type them in the chat, I will be reading them out loud for the recording purposes. But you all are welcome to take this time and one at a time. Just ask Reagan your questions.
Everybody must be eating their lunch.
I have a quick question, if that's all right.
Austin, I'd love to hear it, please.
Perfect. So
Austin, could you do me a favor?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't think we know one another. Can you explain to me what are you with an agency or are you a producer?
So I'm Austin Vincent, the Director of State Affairs and General Counsel for Colorado Farm Bureau. It's a general agricultural.
Oh, sure, I know the Farm
association here.
Bureau. Certainly,
ma'am.
Austin.
So
Yes.
I've had a lot of members, or a few members talking to me about this, so that's why I joined. Actually, a few of my members are on here, but did want to ask real quick about the veterinary client-patient relationship. In reading what you had on the PowerPoint, I was wondering if the vet would need to come out and see our members herd before, or if there was already that relationship with the member by bringing in cattle or horses, mainly cattle, if that already formed that VCPR, and if mainly the question is, do our members need to have their vet come out and look at their herd before they have it, or does the current relationship already work?
Right. Austin, excellent question. Thank you so much for asking that. That's when we get down into the weeds a bit. As a veterinarian, I think the best VCPR you can get is when you have that veterinarian out to see your place, to look at your animals. Veterinarians often think they have to go, and sometimes producers do as well. You only go out to a farm to do something, to to treat a sick cow, to do pregnancy diagnosis, etc., things like that. But actually having your veterinarian walk around your operation and better understand what your goals are, you will likely find many issues that you can talk about and get information from your veterinarian to have a better production and to have a better operation. So the gold standard would be to come and have them come out and really know your farm and know what you're going towards. And I think that you'd have a better relationship with your veterinarian than if you just say, hey, you've treated some of my sick cows, will you come out? That's not clearly defined, but I would highly recommend that sort of appointment for the better relationship between the veterinarian and the producer. The producer will also get better service because of the fact the more the veterinarian knows about your operation.
Thank you, ma'am. And so I have, I guess, a quick example of when this might be used. So I grew up on a ranch in northeastern New Mexico. Still go down and help my family when we can. And the two biggest times, or I guess three biggest times that we really need to get antibiotics is for branding, for fall work, and whenever our calves come up with like scours or pneumonia, something like that. So my question, I guess, with those three examples, would it be in the same vein as the VCPR question? If our vet came out and helped us with preg checking and they saw our herd, would that be proper enough to then in the next, I guess, 8 months, come back and us ask for antibiotics and other medicines for when we brand? And then I guess for the preg check side, they'll already be there. But I guess the main question is, would that allow us to then go to our vet and ask for these antibiotics? And would that be a proper VCPR?
So again, the magic's in the wording. When you say see my place, is that a drive-by or is that a understanding what you do, a walkthrough? And that's the kind of thing when you just say see my place, I can't tell you how far there you're going. And I think that will be the ethical concern of the individual veterinarian as to whether they saw your place and understood your place well enough. So the legal terminology, it is up to interpretation. But what I can just tell you that the better that veterinarian knows your operation, the better service you're going to get.
Yes, ma'am. So more specifically, when they come to our place to help with preg checking, that would create that VCPR. Oh, okay. So there is some gray area with that.
There is gray area there that says if they just walk in and put their arm in, 50 cows or something like that, that doesn't mean they've understood the things that I mentioned about what the VCPR is, what your goals are, where you get your animals from, what your risks are. So there needs to be a conversation there, not just an arming a bunch of cows and then leaving.
So then what I'm hearing is essentially we need to make an appointment with our vet to just literally drive around the ranch and talk about our ranch.
That would be to the benefit of your producers, is to encourage that, not the low ball, but the high ball.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Reagan?
Yes. Oh, Carl Beeman, nice to hear your voice, Carl.
How are you? Good to see you.
I'm just fine. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming to the webinar.
Oh, we had our Pueblo County Stockmen's Association meeting the other night, and Marv Heyman talked to us about this. And a lot of people asked me, is a VCPR, is it an actual document that the vet signs off on or something, or is it just the vet's word?
No, it's a relationship thing. I've never seen a document as close as I've gotten, Carl, is seeing what I wrote down there on the slides a few moments ago about what it is. Okay. So it's up to let me get that for you. It is up to interpretation, which makes it a little harder. There you go. It makes it up, okay. It's up to interpretation. And that's why I certainly wasn't trying to, when I was answering Austin's question, it's important to know that there is a benefit to this VCPR.
Right.
That people sometimes don't understand. And I know I have heard things like, oh, the veterinarians are trying to make money. You don't necessarily have to buy the antibiotics from that veterinarian, but what they want to know is that the veterinarian has told you how to give it, how often to give it, the dose to give it, and overseeing the fact that you're giving the right antibiotic for the right issue. And those things in the long run should not be considered something that's trying to make your life harder. It actually will make your life better in the long term.
Very good. Thank you.
And really quick, we have 2 questions in the chat. I know we have a hand raised, but our first question from the chat is, does this include the use of topical antibiotics, such as a topical triple antibiotic?
At this point, probably not. The ones that are pinpointed for livestock, et cetera, are the injectables in this round. I can't tell you in the future. I can't tell you as that they won't be in the future, but at this point, they are usually the ones that are injectable.
Perfect. And then our second question is this the same relationship required for the veterinarian feed directives today?
Yes.
Okay, and then we have a hand raised, so you're welcome to unmute or type in the chat, just depending on your internet capabilities.
Yeah, this is Carlisle Courier, President of Colorado Farm Bureau. My big question I hear from many areas of the state, there's already a severe shortage of large animal veterinarians. There are people that have a hard time finding a vet to come to their place when they have a problem or emergency like dystocia in a cow or whatever. How are they going to be able to get a vet to come out and go around their place and view their operation, somebody that just raises a few cows, when they can't even get a vet there in an emergency situation? How do we address that problem?
Oh, it is a giant problem. And working at the veterinary school, then Fort Collins, we understand this and are trying to make some changes about it, but it's a very hard one. Carl, I would like you to talk to your clients and your producers in this way. It is oftentimes hard to get a veterinarian when you need them that as soon as possible, right? That's a different relation than when you call them up and say, I'd like to talk to you in the next month. Right now, your producers have 5 months to get prepared for this. They should be able to get that veterinarian out to see their place and to understand what's going on with their operation sometime in the next 5 months. But what's hard is to get a veterinarian there in the next 5 minutes, especially when there's a veterinary shortage. And as I say, I understand completely about that shortage. I never thought I'd see the day that there'd be a shortage of livestock veterinarians, because when I started my career in veterinary medicine, that's what the majority of people wanted to be. So I completely understand it. But when you talk to your customers, your producers, etc., remind them that it's hard to get somebody there in 5 minutes, but you should be able to get somebody there in the next 5 months. Does that make sense?
Well, it certainly helps, but those that have larger producers, it's not going to be a problem for it. It's a
Right.
small guy with just 10 or 15 cows that is not not listening what's going on, and they don't worry about it till the time comes that they do have a sick cow and need vaccine for it, and when they can't get it, it is going to be a serious problem for them. And I told
that. And as I say, that's one of the reasons there's been, if you've noticed in a lot of the trade magazines, there's been articles about this. It's one of the reasons that Beth wanted us to make this webinar. And it reminds me a little bit, it's just a level of preparation that has to happen. Interestingly, and the state of California did this stop the over-the-counter antibiotic thing in I think it was in 2018. And it's interesting how quickly, once it happened, those smaller producers, etc., figured out how to plan ahead for that. They didn't understand it before, but they planned for it once it happened to them. So I think our job is to get out there and explain to people that this is what is happening. It's not going to go away. Prepare rather than panic, and just do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's important we get that word out to our producers, because some of them are still going to be caught blindsided, even though we've been doing everything we can to get the news out.
I feel your pain. I get it completely.
So Tony, I know I saw your hand up as well. Really quick, there was one question that came in before you in the chat. I know there's others, but so really quick, there's one that says, I assume this is the same for antibiotics and vaccines alike. Is that correct?
No, vaccines have nothing to do with this. This isn't the same. Vaccines are something that we highly encourage. The same thing as we encourage biosecurity procedures to keep disease out, but vaccines do not make bacteria more resistant to antibiotics. So it has nothing to do with vaccines.
Perfect. And then Tony, you're welcome to unmute and ask your question.
Mine is more a comment to President Courier's comments that he was making earlier. But many times you're talking that we need to plan on these events, and I see where that would be beneficial for like when you're calving but many times there's unforeseen circumstances that you've got to get something done and get something done right away, and it might be over a holiday or a weekend when your vet isn't available. And so I could see where it would be very important to develop that relationship with your veterinarian so that you can have that product on hand when something like that should occur.
Thanks for your comment, Tony. Planning ahead is the question, is much of the point.
And then we have a couple more questions from the chat. There's, how long does a VCPR typically last? So do we need to have our vet out every 6 months, every year, every 2 years? What is the timeline to keep it current?
That's a great question. And I'll tell you right here on the slide that's showing on the deck is about all they say about a VCPR. So I'm not exactly sure how long that is. If Carl's still on the call, he may know. I don't know.
No, I don't know. Marv, Dr. Heyman didn't discuss that the other night, and I don't know what that is.
I don't think anybody really knows. So let's aim to get the first one done, and then we'll worry about how often it has to be. You know, those are the kind of questions that need to come out and of the, you know, this kind of situation. But right now, for those, the emphasis should be put on for those of people that don't have a VCPR. Let's make sure they do get a VCPR by June 11th.
Our next question is, where I live, the vets are overwhelmed, not accepting new patients. I have had to drive over 2 hours for a vet, and they are extremely overwhelmed as well. Sorry, I messed up the chat here. They aren't going to come to my small farm. What do people in my situation do?
I think I don't exactly know what you do other than the fact that you do something, look into it sooner than rather later. I don't, I've heard of incidences of like that and felt, and as I say, my heart goes out to you simply because I know what it feels like to, you know, have so few quote unquote large animal veterinarians these days. But I would say that I would work hard now trying to get a vet on a phone, because not all of them are out of business, but perhaps the ones you have called, and see what you can do. I think that's too bad that it is that situation occurs. I'd love to have more people entering the profession, especially to take care of large animals.
Irene, I see you unmuted. Feel free to ask it.
So my question is, this is Morris, Irene's husband. So my question is, now do feed stores, Big R, do they still are they available to handle this if you have a VCPR from a veterinarian?
Well, I think what we don't know, that's an excellent question. What we don't know is how the feed stores, et cetera, may respond to this, because, you know, there are some stores that have veterinarians associated with them that will, that you could potentially develop a VCPR with. So that may happen. We really don't know how the market will respond to it. Some places will, you know, stores may decide it's not worth having antibiotics, you know, on their supply list. Others might, and others might have it, but need to have the VCPR from the prescription from the veterinarian to sell that stuff to you. We don't exactly know how that's going to work, because it's a market shift thing, if you know what I mean.
I understand that, but to Tony's credit, you know, with what he was talking about, if we don't have a place to buy that, and you know, and you need to get it now, it's gonna make it really tough on producers to try and find that prescription drug.
That is a possibility. We don't know if will happen or not.
We'll go to Taylor and then Carl, I see your question in the chat, so I will ask that after Taylor's.
Thank you, Beth. The question I have is with the VCPR, and it is a lot of black and white, or gray area, I should say. It's not black and white. Is if you, like, I know I have my equine vet, would it be like if they're willing to write a script for an antibiotic for, say, cattle or goats or sheep or anything, is that kind of in the liberty of the comfort that your vet that you currently have would be able to do? Or is it, do they have to be having this, with it being a specialty in equine and writing it for other livestock? Is that just up to the liberty of the vet to make that decision?
Taylor, that's a great question. And I'm going to say, I kind of can't, I think that is up to you, and that's part of the relationship.
Okay.
How you work that out. Because as I say, one of the reasons I slipped back to the slide that just defined what the VCPR is that's what we're working on. And again, I know this seems like such a heavy burden on the producers, but in the long term, the better relationship you have with your vet, the better you'll be able to raise those animals, and the better it'll be better in the long term. So you do what you can, and you know, it's one of those things where you do what you can. When you can do your best, it works out the best, and when you don't do your best, sometimes you get, you know, not quite as good service. So it's sort of up between the veterinarian and the producer.
Thank you.
And then we had a couple things come in through the chat. So there's the question, are there any kind of regulations concerning how much of a certain antibiotic a producer can have in storage?
I don't believe there are. I don't think it's a particularly wise thing to sort of hoard antibiotic, because in fact, do remember that they have an expiration date, and that's a waste of money if it's around after the expiration date, because it doesn't work as effectively then. And so hoarding is probably not your best strategy.
Perfect, thank you. And then it's just a comment, but for those of you that are maybe watching this recording later, there's a comment in the chat that reads, as an example, from my perspective as a producer, we have a relationship with our vet and have a prescription on file for specific medications at our vet supply place that is valid for a year. We can go in and anytime that year to purchase the product that is listed in the prescription. This is for products that already require prescriptions. So I would assume it would work similarly for those newly labeled products. And I think that goes back to what you were talking about, Reagan, how it's up to each store to do that and what type of liability they're willing to take on as a pharmacy type of place. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. The next question in the chat is, I cannot even find a vet that handles farm livestock and will come out to our small farm. Is there an agency or other resource that can help us locate a farm vet?
First, I'd encourage you to contact Colorado Veterinary Medical Association. Then I would, so that's the statewide veterinary association. If you work with if you go to your local extension agent office, they likely would know of other veterinarians in your community. And then I'm not sure exactly what your operation looks like, but certainly if you're in any kind of animal group, like, you know, a goat group or a pig group or something like that, you can ask your friends and neighbors. Try not to stay in, think we would all agree, for those of us that like working with animals, that it helps to know your neighbors and understand what's going on in your region. So I would reach out to them as well.
And then there was one question that came in to me through email prior to this webinar, was the question about dewormers. If you feel that those are getting pulled at this time, or if they're not, if that's something the FDA is going to look at in the future.
At this point, the dewormers are not something that are being focused on. It's the injectables, the penicillin types, the oxytyrosine, those sort of things. I can't predict the future.
Well, thank you, Reagan. Are there any other questions, either from those of you that want to unmute or type in the chat?
And we have plenty of time. I'm happy to listen to any of it. I know it's frustrating to many people, and the lack of large animal veterinarians is as frustrating to me as it is to you all. But these are issues that we're just trying to work on. And so we want to do it in collaboration with those of you that are raising animals. But this is something we have to face together because it's a federal mandate.
I will say real quick, I do appreciate the clarification that vaccinations are not included on this, because I was assuming that vaccines were included in all of this. So it's just antibiotics, like the slide said, but I was assuming that for some.
No, and Austin, it may, in certain cases, they may get down to like antifungals or antivirals or something, things like that. But right now, it's the big pressure is on the antibiotics, because the concept of this antibiotic resistance thing in both human and veterinary medicine is being taken very seriously for the reasons that I mentioned before. One of the things that associations and the Farm Bureau and agencies working with producers of all sizes, really the best thing that, once we get the panic and the sort of shock over about this issue, is to make sure that our people understand how to prevent disease, how to manage our animals so we get less disease, and how a shot with an antibiotic does not cure everything. So we need to put our focus on that. And certainly CSU Extension would be happy to have webinars, have talks, et cetera, to work on those issues of biosecurity and disease prevention.
Go ahead, Carl.
Reagan, the other night, Dr. Heyman, he kind of mentioned that there is a possibility of sometime in the future having like nurse practitioner veterinarians that aren't really trained veterinarians, but are kind of licensed to do stuff. Is that an actual thing?
It is a movement that has that has been talked about for probably 20 years. And what they're talking about doing is maybe having, I don't know how many of you all have seen practitioner assistants as opposed to practitioners in human medicine. Oftentimes your PA, that will come in and take care of you, for a laceration, for something simpler, give you a vaccination, you'll find spends more time with you and is almost easier and better to work with than your full-fledged MD. Having this kind of position, as I say, has been going around in veterinary medicine for 20-25 years. There's new interest in it. I don't know where that interest will go.
Okay, thank you.
And there was a question, it's more for me, but it says, will this recording be available for us to distribute to clients or other public people for information? Absolutely. So this recording will be live and recorded on the Pueblo County Extension YouTube channel by the end of this week. You will also be able to find it in a couple spots on the Colorado State University Extension website. By the end of this week, you all that pre-registered for this webinar will get an additional email from me that has the webinar link from this recorded session and the PDF version of Reagan's presentation. That way you can have access to the references that she listed. So you will all get that, and you'll be able to share that email with anybody you would like, even if it's just a friend and neighbor type of situation. And then there was an extra question. Reagan, can you go back to the antibiotic slide? It looks like someone wanted to look at that one specifically.
Sure. And this one is just, as I say, there's 3 or 4 of those references that talk about specific animals and the diseases of concern and the pathogens and all that, and the antibiotics that are affected. So that happens, that information is for sheep and goats, and also on those previous links. I didn't want to go into all this detail in our short webinar, but I think you can understand the kind of information that you can get from those references.
Perfect. And then we have one more question: is what steps is the vet industry taking to have all vets be on the same page?
On the same page about what? Can I understand? Could you expand that question?
Hi, Reagan. This is Eric.
Oh, hi, Eric.
Yeah, so that question is for me. I'm assuming that there will be producers that go from vet to vet to vet to get the right kind of prescription or establish this relationship with all sorts of different vets in the mix. So I just was kind of trying to capture what, from the veterinary side, how their communication is getting out there to those vets so that if a producer calls them, they're all on the same page. So.
Excellent question, Eric. I think the feds that have, decided upon this sort of thing are leaving it up to communities. I mean, that will be something that develops most likely as this takes effect. Because right now there, as to my knowledge, there is no specific, they haven't gotten into the weeds. They're just trying to see how much improvement there is from that, as it's written right now. But it's and you're making, you can always, we always know there's, I'm not supposed to say this, but to you guys, I probably can, many ways to skin a cat, as they say in the old days, about how things are done. And whether that gets regulated more closely, if people don't do it well to begin with, I think that will likely take time to work itself out.
Thanks.
Well, thanks for the question.
All right, folks, we're getting pretty close to 12:50. It's 12:47 now. We can stay on here until 1. So if you have any additional questions or even comments you would like to share with the group or with Reagan, please feel free to put them in the chat, unmute. You're welcome to do that still for a little bit longer that we still have on here.
And I'll take up some white space for a second. I just can't, I understand how this seems so shocking to producers because it's not the way things have been. But it can lead to a lot, one door closes, the other one opens. Some better relationships. Maybe there will be put more thinking into how you can have more veterinary services for people in rural communities. I don't know what the shakeup will lead to, but it definitely will lead to better use of antibiotics so that they'll be around and be able to be useful when they're needed in the future. So that's one good step that I hope you appreciate, despite the fact you feel a little bit frustrated right now. A lot of times we give antibiotics when we don't need to. I mean, I've done it before as a veterinarian. We just get frustrated and do it, but making sure that we focus on using them responsibly is important. And also perhaps this will bring up a lot more focus on the fact of the need of more large animal veterinarians. And that is something that's a can that's usually kicked around a lot, but I don't know how much is done about it. So maybe this will help with that. So that's my thing, but I really appreciate you being on this webinar and thinking carefully about it.
All right, well then if there's no more additional questions or comments, you all are welcome to jump off. Like I said, it should be available by the end of this week on the Pueblo County Extension YouTube page. You'll get a link from me with that directly and the copy of the PDF presentation as well. So please feel free to share that link and the presentation so people have it as a resource. And then you'll also be able to find it on a couple different spots on the Extension CSU website as well. So thanks so much for joining today. Thank you, Reagan, and you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, and feel free to call me if you need to. Love to hear anything we can do to help.
Sounds good.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.